We have a big week coming up, that impeachment trial set to begin Tuesday. What are you thinking it will look like?
Well, I have to say that first day with the formalities, the Chief Justice presenting himself, taking an oath, and then in turn having us take a second oath. You know, we all take an oath on the first day we're sworn in to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. This is like an oath that a juror might take, but we pledged to do impartial justice. And the solemnity, the seriousness of the moment really struck me, and I hope it struck all my colleagues much the same way, especially when Congressman Adam Schiff read the articles aloud, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. So Tuesday, the trial begins in earnest, but there's many things that have yet to be determined. One of those is whether we will be able to hear from live witnesses.
I'm interested in that. Do you think that'll happen?
You know, I'm certainly hopeful. If you think of a trial, you think of witnesses and evidence and documents. We have called for 4 witnesses who are relevant to the subject matter of the impeachment and who have firsthand knowledge. We've asked for former National Security Advisor John Bolton, who called what was going on a drug deal. We called for 2 senior White House staffers, Michael Duffy and Robert Blair, both of whom have firsthand knowledge about the president withholding congressionally approved military aid to Ukraine to sort of use as they face Russian aggression on their eastern front. And then we've called for the acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, to be a witness because he's an eyewitness to so much of the conduct that is at the center of the abuse of power and obstruction.
Do you think Republicans will let them speak?
Well, I'm heartened by a handful of my Republican colleagues expressing an openness to hearing from witnesses. You know, to me, it should be just an obvious thing that one does every other impeachment trial that the Senate has ever had, including those for other federal officials aside from the 2 presidential impeachments. All of them have included witnesses and the ability for senators to ask questions through the Chief Justice to get to the full facts. That's what we need, is we need a full, fair, and honest trial.
How much of this do you think the public will get to see?
I think most of it the public will get to see. Obviously, those rules can be set at various times. They can be revisited, but it's by a majority vote of the Senate. And I expect that most of this will be conducted in an open setting that the American people can watch.
I want to play a quick clip for you from Speaker Pelosi, something she said last week, and then I'll get your reaction. So let's watch this here.
He has been held accountable. He has been impeached. He's been impeached forever. They can never erase that.
She said something along the same lines several times, that now this is in history. He's been impeached. It's on the record. Is that enough for you? Or do you want conviction and removal?
You know, I want to do impartial justice, as I have just sworn this past week to do. And so I'm going to watch this trial unfold. We'll start with arguments from both the managers that were sent over to prosecute this from the House. But we've yet to hear the president's case, even though he was offered the opportunity, afforded the opportunity to present witnesses and cross-examine the witnesses who did appear in the impeachment inquiry. I want to hear all of that, and then I'll make my decision.
So I'm hearing you right that you're saying your mind is not made up yet.
Well, I've only heard half the case, if you will. I'm surprised that the president, if he thinks it was a perfect phone call that he had with President Zelensky, as he said many times and tweeted just yesterday, that then he should come in and explain why and present witnesses with firsthand knowledge that will help him make his case. If he believes that, why doesn't he? Why has he not participated? And that's what I hope he'll answer.
I think some of the pushback that would come from Republicans is that according to the latest Marquette Law School poll, most Wisconsinites say they still don't want President Trump removed from office. You're representing the state of Wisconsin. So how do you justify going forward with an impeachment trial?
Several reasons. First of all, this isn't a matter of polling. We just took an oath to do impartial justice on a trial that has yet to have its initial arguments presented. And I hope that the Wisconsin people and the American people will be watching and watching closely, and that regardless of whether their judgment changes, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and I just took an oath as a juror to do impartial justice, and I'm going to do just that.
Something that just came out last week, according to the Government Accountability Office,
Yes.
They're saying President Trump's hold on security assistance to Ukraine was illegal.
Illegal.
How will that make a difference in the trial?
Well, it's sort of late breaking news, but on Thursday, we saw the Government Accountability Office report. They have studied this question very carefully, and it is illegal to withhold congressionally approved aid. It violates federal law. And if you recall, earlier in this set of events, two high-ranking government officials resigned from their jobs rather than participate in this illegal activity. It was very notable. We haven't heard much from them, but if they were willing to give up a career, having worked that long at their jobs because they believe they were being asked to break the law, it just adds to the seriousness of all of this conduct.
There's so much new coming out right before this trial. Specifically, the question if the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine was being surveilled. There are all these text messages coming out now about that. What do you make of this, and how much of this new evidence do you think will be involved in the trial?
Well, I think we're talking about the revelations around Lev Parnas. He has provided documents after being released by a judge who's overseeing a criminal case against him. He's released documents to the House committees that did the impeachment inquiry. They have now released those to the Senate and the public. So those, I think, can fairly be discussed and weighed. As far as all of the things he's discussed when he's done interviews with the media, I do think he needs to be deposed under oath, under penalty of perjury. And I think there's a lot of things he's talked about that need to be followed up on, but
well, he
not
also
necessarily central to the impeachment of the president. There's so many other names that he's raised.
Well, he also said that it wasn't just withholding military aid to Ukraine, but withholding all aid, and that the president knew about everything.
He has said that. He corroborates what other witnesses have said who were deposed as well as interviewed in public in the impeachment inquiry. So I think we have a lot of that in the record. But I certainly think the things that he's said in television interviews that have been widely watched need to be followed up upon, especially invoking folks whose names have not been referenced so much in the impeachment inquiry against the president. I'll keep an open mind as this progresses, but I do think the documents he's released that have been therefore released by the Intelligence Committee in the House, is a good place to start. And I think he needs to be deposed under oath.
We had Senator Ron Johnson on the show last weekend, and he said he wants to hear from the whistleblower. That's still the number one witness he wants to hear from. Do you want that?
You know, I am a part of a bipartisan group of senators who have taken a lot of action to protect whistleblowers. It takes a lot of courage. It takes, you're taking great risk to blow the whistle. And I believe that we need to protect the whistleblower, and especially given the fact that the statement that the whistleblower made and releasing information to the Inspector General was done with secondhand knowledge. He talked about all the people who raised these issues with him, but then the House impeachment inquiry talked to those people. So we have firsthand witnesses. I don't think we need a secondhand witness.
I do want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the primary. Are you going to endorse in the presidential primary?
You know, Wisconsin, and in fact the city of Milwaukee, is hosting the Democratic National Convention, something that I'm very, very excited about. I don't know if the race will be decided by then or whether it will be a contested or brokered convention, but I really want to play a role of having that be a celebration of coming to a decision about our nominee, and telling any of the candidates now who are interested in getting ready how to win Wisconsin. I was fortunate enough with a lot of hard work to win the state of Wisconsin in my recent re-election by nearly 11 points. That's unusual for a state that has had razor-thin races between Democrats and Republicans in recent years. And I think I learned a lot. And I think that I want to share that with our Democratic candidates, because we need to win Wisconsin in order to have a Democratic president.
So is that a no? You won't be endorsing?
I do not anticipate endorsing before the convention.
What about Iran? It almost seems like this has been on the back burner because of impeachment, but it's so important. What is the current threat, you think, with Iran right now? Well,
I think the current matter is to really show restraint and continue to de-escalate what has been a series of events, not just in the past couple of weeks, that have drawn our focus very sharply, but frankly, it's been escalating over months and months. Perhaps you could say it all started when President Trump withdrew from the nuclear agreement between 5 countries and Iran, or P+5 with Iran. And everyone started ratcheting up tensions. It was obviously a very, very dangerous situation recently. What I think needs to happen is that the president needs to work with Congress and our allies to de-escalate, to show restraint, and to get back to a negotiation to make sure that we have in check Iran's nuclear ambitions and other malign behavior. The other thing I would say is I've joined a resolution offered by my colleague Tim Kaine, which is bipartisan, and that resolution would say to the president, you cannot go to war with Iran without working with Congress. Congress is given the authority and responsibility in the U.S. Constitution to declare war. And the president can't just do this on his own without violating the Constitution. I think that's really key, and we will have a vote on that shortly. I expect it to pass because we have sufficient Republican support for this initiative.
Well, a Republican, Senator Ron Johnson, sat in that same chair last week, and he said sometimes there's not time to go to Congress. What if there's that big of a threat? So how do you back that up?
My colleague is right. I don't disagree with him. If we are being attacked, if we are under attack, the president already has ample authority to respond to protect us. That's job number one. but it is Congress that declares wars. It is Congress that authorizes the use of military force. And frankly, I will say it's not just this president, but presidents of both parties have tried to consolidate more and more power to do these things without consulting. And that's a dangerous situation when we're talking about something that isn't just a matter of self-defense and protection of America and America's interests.
USMCA, the Senate just passed it, the trade agreement.
Yes.
What do you think will be that effect for people here in Wisconsin?
You know, I opposed the decades-old NAFTA, which was the underlying trade agreement between Mexico, the USA, and Canada. I opposed it particularly because I thought that we lost jobs, especially to south of the border, especially manufacturing jobs that Wisconsin boasts so many of, but we lost so many. I wanted to see NAFTA renegotiated, and I was pleased when this president took the initiative to start that process. Now, I think his first product came up short in a number of respects, and I was looking at the negotiations that flowed from there between the House of Representatives, and I have to give credit to Nancy Pelosi as Speaker for really strengthening the agreement. When I saw the enforcement provisions that will be in effect to keep, to make sure that the strong labor language in the underlying bill is actually enforceable, it won my support. And that, along with some key provisions that focus on dairy and agriculture generally, I think are going to be a win-win for our state. So I was proud to support the USMCA in its final form.
Senator Baldwin, I know you're headed back to Washington, so thank you for your time.
Thank you.